This is video number 7 and the final video of the Balance of Payments mini-series. This video is high-level only for high-level only students, and in this video I'm going to discuss the implications of a persistent current account surplus. So let's get started. So the IB Economics syllabus for high-level students, it lists the learning outcome as such. Discuss the possible consequences of a rising current account surplus, including number 1, lower domestic consumption and lower domestic investment. Remember, having a current account surplus, that means it has to be balanced with a deficit on the financial account or the capital account, which means that there's a lot of investment happening overseas. That country is investing a lot overseas or lending a lot of money to overseas countries that have deficits, right? Because if you have a surplus, a persistent surplus on your current account, it must be balanced with a deficit on your capital and financial accounts. This could lead to lower domestic consumption and lower domestic investment because a lot of these investment funds, instead of being invested domestically in the country, they're being invested overseas or lent to overseas countries that have deficits. At the same time, a country could have a rising current account surplus because its products are cheap and therefore they are exported, but its citizens are quite poor, and that's why they can't afford a lot of imports. So just because a country has a persistent current account surplus doesn't necessarily mean that this is a good thing. This is also a disequilibrium in the balance of payments. Okay, some people seem to think that a deficit is a bad thing, but a surplus is a good thing. That's not necessarily the case. If you have a surplus because there's low domestic consumption, because your citizens enjoy a very low standard of living and there are high rates of poverty, that's not necessarily a good thing. So these are the first two consequences. A persistent current account surplus could be a result of lower domestic consumption and lower domestic investment, and could lead to lower domestic consumption and lower domestic investment. At the same time, when you have a persistent current account surplus, this leads to an appreciation of your domestic currency, because the demand for your currency by countries overseas who are importing your goods and services, so you are exporting your goods and services a lot more than you are importing from foreign countries. That means the demand for your currency is very strong, okay, which could lead to an appreciation of your domestic currency. So what? Well, first of all, that could be inflationary, okay, so it might lead to even lower domestic consumption and lower domestic investment. At the same time, the appreciation of your domestic currency could lead the central bank to raising interest rates, which would lower domestic investment even further. So do you see how they're all interconnected? Last but not least, a persistent current account surplus leads to reduced export competitiveness. If your currency is appreciating, that means your goods and services that you are exporting are becoming more expensive for foreigners. You're making it harder for your exporting industries to compete on the global market. So these are all consequences of a persistent and a rising current account surplus. Remember that having a current account surplus is often balanced with a deficit on the financial and the capital account, which means that the country is buying a lot of assets overseas and investing overseas and lending a lot of money to overseas countries. That isn't necessarily a good thing, because this is money that could be invested domestically, right? So just remember that. And also the upward pressure on the domestic currency, the fact that it appreciates, it makes your exports less competitive and could lead to an increase in imports as well. I hope this has clarified the consequences of a persistent current account surplus. Have a good day.